car crashes, defective products, dangerous drugs, injuries, and abuse. Across the state of Alabama, the attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis, Wright, are here to serve you. Your tough legal questions answered by our experts with the attorneys of Hollis, Wright.
It is good to have you with us. You are watching The Attorneys. I'm Art Franklin, and we're going to dive into a topic that many overlook until it's too late. That's underinsured and uninsured motorist coverage. We're going to talk about that. As always, a reminder that attorneys at Hollis, Wright, they're standing by right now, manning the phones to take your call at 1-844-LAW-TALK. That's 1-844-LAW-TALK. It is a free call. It is a confidential call, and they would love to hear from you. Get over to our managing partner here, Josh Wright. Good to see you, buddy.
Great to see you, too. Hope you had a great week.
I did. Real good.
You know, we have done shows on uninsured motorists and underinsured motorists in the past. And there are certain subparts to this show that we could do entire shows on. We're going to do kind of a broad overview about why it's important to have uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage today. And oftentimes, as you know, Art, when we are doing shows on specific issues, we try and get lawyers that really are experts in this area. Dylan Hobbs is with us today. Dylan is not only a great lawyer, he is an up-and-coming rising star in the bar, but also is a personal friend of mine. In fact, our firms do a lot of the same work, and a lot of times we're communicating with each other about things that we're seeing in the marketplace and areas that are important areas for us to all help our clients. So Dylan does a fabulous job, and I thought when I saw him last time, hey, let's get Dylan on the show. So I'm glad you're on, man.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Tell us just, first of all, a little bit about kind of your background as a lawyer, who you work with, and just a little bit about the firm, and then we'll jump into this topic.
Okay, great. Yeah, so my name's Dylan Hobbs. I'm a personal injury attorney based here in Birmingham, Alabama. The name of my practice is Hobbs Law, LLC. It's pretty new. I've been doing personal injury work for a number of years now. I've been on both sides of the bar. I've done plaintiff and defense, but now I solely do plaintiff work. And so it's my passion to represent the injured victims out there who need justice.
Do you think, because you and I come from a similar background, we've talked about this before. Of course, I was on the defense side for the first 2 years of my practice and then have been a plaintiff lawyer ever since for the last 25 years or so. Do you think that it gives good context to start on one side of the bar and then maybe work your way over to the other?
I would say that's a good question. I think it depends. I do really appreciate my experience on the other side, doing insurance defense work. You can kind of see the inner workings of how that process works. You can see the relationship between being a defense attorney and insurance adjusters, and basically how the shots are called. So it does open your eyes in a way. It allows you to identify, I guess, pressure points that you can use to your advantage.
Yeah, we talk a lot about context. Having context is important, and I think sometimes starting on the other side of the bar gives you context to be a better lawyer on the side that we're on now. All right, we'll get past that. Let's talk for a second just about kind of the general concept of uninsured and underinsured motorists. Can you just kind of give us an overview of generally what this topic is about?
Sure. So uninsured motorist coverage is a type of insurance that comes into play when you're involved in a wreck with someone who does not have insurance. So as personal injury attorneys, we kind of take a look at this. There's two different types of circumstances where uninsured motorist coverage can apply. You actually have a situation where there's underinsured motorist coverage, which is where you may be in a wreck with somebody and they do have liability coverage, but it's just not enough to compensate the victim for his injuries and damages.
Yeah, and you know, Art, we see a lot, as unfortunate as it is, a lot of times when someone is involved in an automobile accident and they're badly injured, the coverage available to the person that caused the accident, the at-fault participant in that accident, does not have sufficient coverage to compensate the individual that was the victim. And so in those circumstances, uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage really is a gap filler to protect someone, to make sure that they're fully and completely compensated in an accident that they didn't cause and that they're not at fault for.
And I think you're leading right into my question for Dylan, as you were talking about context and you used the word important. I wanted to ask you the importance of having underinsured and uninsured motorist coverage.
I think it's extremely important, because what you're doing is, if you don't have it, you're getting out there on the public road where you have people, obviously we have bad drivers all across the country. You're putting yourself in a situation where you might be involved with somebody in a wreck and it's not your fault. And then they don't have the insurance in place to provide money for your medical bills, compensate you for your pain, your suffering, your mental anguish. And so what you're doing is you're putting yourself at risk if you don't have that type of coverage.
You know, Art, the way this generally works, just to give some level of context to coverages, generally people have policies that have liability coverage, which is if you're at fault and you cause an accident, you have a duty to carry liability coverage to protect someone else that you injured. Alabama mandates a minimum of $25,000 in coverage, which as lawyers, I think is too low, personally. However, it is what it is, and we recognize the fact that the legislature's made that decision at this point, but we do lobby for more. So you have liability insurance. You also generally carry property or comprehensive insurance, which is if a tree falls on your car is covered through comprehensive coverage. If there's property damage that you cause or someone causes you and they may not have insurance, then the property coverage applies. And the third component of coverage is this uninsured or underinsured motorist. I call it rainy day coverage, where the coverage is available when someone doesn't have sufficient coverage or any coverage at all to protect you on a rainy day. We're going to talk a little bit about how, and we'll unpack a little bit about how it applies in a lot of different contexts throughout the show. But I will tell you this, and Dylan will readily accept this as a lawyer on our side of the bar. Even though the state mandates that everybody has liability insurance, the statistics out there are about 20% of the people on the road right now do not have liability insurance. Now, you can get in a lot of trouble if you don't. You're going to lose your license. You're going to pay a significant fine. So you need to carry liability insurance, but for those that don't carry it, uninsured motorist coverage kind of protects you.
Absolutely.
Let's talk just a little bit about what the minimum amounts are for uninsured motorist coverage if you're going to get it, and whether are you guaranteed to have it, or do you have to elect to have it? Do you have to opt out? How does that work?
So the insurance company, when you purchase automobile insurance, is required to offer uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage to you. You can elect to reject that coverage, which obviously, as I said earlier, is not a good choice. And you have to actually sign a rejection form that the insurance company will have to evidence that it did offer you that coverage. We could talk about that for 10 minutes, but the state required minimum uninsured motorist coverage is $25,000 per claimant and $50,000 per accident.
That's right. When we come back, because I want to unwrap this even more, when we come back, let's talk a little bit about the process that you use and why having a lawyer to make sure that you activate your uninsured motorist coverage is super important. That's something Dylan and I can kind of discuss and explain, and it will highlight something that's very important that we talk about a lot, which is you don't have to come to us, because there are a lot of lawyers out there, but I recommend you go to a lawyer to make sure that you're protected and you can actually activate your uninsured motorist coverage if you need it.
There is still a lot to unpack as we talk about underinsured and uninsured motorist coverage, but this is a place to come to get that information right. There's also a number you can call to get information and also to get your questions answered, and it's free and it's confidential, and that number is 1-844-LAW-TALK. You will reach a lawyer from Hollis, Wright, standing by throughout this call, throughout this show to take your call. Ready to hear from you. We're going to keep this conversation going when we come back. Stay with us. We'll be back. You're watching The Attorneys.
Here's some good information from our firm to you. Hollis Wright recently launched the Law Talk podcast. With podcasts becoming so popular, this will be a simple way to provide our loyal viewers with more opportunities to access information about important legal topics and to learn more about our firm and how we can help you if the need ever arises. There are many ways to access the Law Talk podcast. You can simply scan the QR code on your screen. Also, episodes are always available on the Hollis Wright YouTube channel, as well as on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you consume your podcasts. Just search up Hollis Wright in the Law Talk podcast. Don't wait, take advantage and listen today. Thanks for watching The Attorneys, and we know you'll enjoy the Law Talk podcast.
The Attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis Wright, are here to serve you.
When we started the show in 2011, my goal was to do what our firm does best. Help people answer questions related to real-world legal issues they have in their lives in a way that's not intimidating to talk with a lawyer. If the issue is important to you, it's equally important to us, and we're ready to talk with you at no cost.
Yeah, oftentimes people are confronting various legal issues in their lives that really run the gamut of a lot of different legal practice areas such as bankruptcy, criminal law, civil law such as personal injury, divorces, domestic relations. And to be able to have a show once a week that covers those practice areas and answers people's questions in those areas, that's really the main objective of the show.
We use the resources of the many lawyers at our law firm to create a plan that has a lasting impact for each person that calls or texts. And we also give back to the community at the same time. We are here to serve you, the viewer, each week on The Attorneys.
Addiction kills hope.
But at Bradford, it all changes here.
Experience the difference
that proven treatment can make.
Find recovery. Find community.
at Bradford.
Welcome back. You are watching The Attorneys. I want to remind you right now to follow Hollis Wright on all social media platforms and make sure you follow us, you share it, you like it, and let people know where we are, because you get some really good information there. As we were going to break, we were talking about, of course, underinsured, uninsured motorist coverage. And I just want to ask you, Dylan, as a passenger in a car and involved in an accident, am I entitled to underinsured, uninsured motorist coverage?
If the automobile insurance policy for the car that you're riding in at the time has underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage, yes, you can make a claim under that policy. Also, if you happen to be a passenger in somebody else's vehicle, but you have your own automobile insurance with underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage, you can also potentially stack that coverage on top of the coverage for the vehicle that you're in at the time of the wreck.
Talk a little bit about that, because that's a great point, and it highlights the importance of having a lawyer. Being able to stack available uninsured motorist coverage, that may not be a topic or an issue that the viewing audience understands. Just in general terms, how does that work?
Okay, so if I'm a passenger in somebody's car, let's say John Doe, he's driving down the road, we get T-boned by somebody, and that somebody, the accident is their fault. Mm-hmm. And I'm legally entitled, in theory, to damages against that driver, but they don't have insurance coverage. I can make a claim under John Doe's policy if he's got uninsured motorist coverage. Now, if I've got my own policy outside of that, because I can't stack additional coverage within John Doe's policy, but for my own policy, let's say I've got 2 cars on there, and I've got $25,000 in coverage per car for each claimant. So that would be a total of $50,000. I can stack that $50,000 in additional coverage to the underinsured, or excuse me, in this case, uninsured motorist coverage for John Doe's car. Yep. So that'd be, yeah.
So that's a good example. Dylan just raised a huge example. If you try and do this on your own, mm-hmm. Look, I'm not saying the insurance companies are and the adjusters are all bad people. There's some really good ones out there that we deal with on a daily basis that do things the right way. But there are also a bunch of shady companies out there that an adjuster does not have an obligation to disclose to you exactly what coverages are available to you. If you do not have a law firm helping you and protecting you, you may have settled that case for $25,000 when, as in Dylan's example, that case is actually worth $75,000 to $100,000, especially if you've been injured. So you want to have a lawyer that can lead, guide, and direct and hold your hand through the process to make sure you activate the right coverages that are available. What Dylan's talking about is stacking, and you can stack coverages of your own policy and maybe the vehicle that you're in on top of one another based on the number of vehicles you may have that you're in and the number of vehicles you may have at home. And so he's raised a very important topic where you can go from a $25,000 case to $100,000 or even a $300,000 case very quickly.
That's what I love about Josh Wright, Dylan, is that he just tells it like it is. You're like, there's a bunch of shady companies out there that can do that.
It is what it is.
That's why you need a law firm like Hollis Wright, especially if you were involved in an accident with someone who's underinsured. That is very important for you to be able to contact a lawyer for that, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll say it myself. I'm an attorney, and if I was in a wreck, I would call a lawyer.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk just for a second, because people may not understand this. You know, we have the guest passenger statute in Alabama that, you know, to the extent the driver of the vehicle that you're in does not engage in some level of wanton conduct, which is above and beyond simple negligence, you may not be able to recover against that individual if he causes an accident or she causes an accident. There are a couple other ways around that, including if you're paying for the travel, if it's a common carrier, there are some ways around it. So another reason why you get to a lawyer. But uninsured motorist becomes important in circumstances like that.
Absolutely, it does. If you're not able to recover against a driver for whatever reason, maybe they're excluded from the policy, you definitely want to have a safety net there.
Yeah. So the safety net is the key to make sure that you are protecting yourself in circumstances where either you can't activate someone else's insurance, but there was somebody that was at fault for your injury.
Just wondering, are there situations where an underinsured motorist coverage might not kick in?
There are situations where that might happen. I can think of a few. One is if your policy is not active, you may not have coverage. Now, Josh and I actually were talking about this during the break. You may have someone who you're related to that you live with, which is what we call resident relative coverage. Maybe you can have coverage under their policy, but at the end of the day, you have to be legally entitled to recover against the at-fault driver. And if you're not legally entitled to recover against the at-fault driver, then underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage does not apply.
Hey, and there have been some changes to the law over my practice over the last 25 years. You know, there were times when if someone ran off the road and they were hit, either they argued that there was an animal like a deer, or they hit a telephone pole that was too close to the road. You know, there were arguments made early on in my career that uninsured motorists should apply in those circumstances, and the law has gotten a little bit clearer over the time that you have to be involved in an accident with someone that you're legally entitled to recover against in order to activate your uninsured. But I'll say this, here's another example of a case that we had recently. Think about this, college kids that live in a dorm. And trying to activate uninsured motorist coverage from one college kid that is a resident, not relative, but a resident of the same apartment, can you activate that? And generally the answer is no, because they're not related, and your policy will define what related means. Doesn't necessarily have to mean you're physically married, but there's a relational requirement. And so sometimes you know, you need a lawyer to walk you through to explain, hey, look, the resident relative component of this to stack coverages is not going to be applicable in your case. Right. Now, we could literally talk about a bunch of these topics. What I want to talk about when we come back, because I know we're getting ready to go to break, I want Dylan just to unwrap a traditional example of when a client comes to him, how he evaluates a case from kind of start to finish to explain to the individual that has been injured exactly the staging of how he protects the uninsured motorist coverage relative to getting at-fault coverage at the same time and making sure that he's able to get both of them.
All right, we'll do that. And if you didn't know before you started watching the show, you have come to the right place, because this is where those smart legal minds are. So make sure you keep this on your schedule, on your calendar every week to watch this show. You are watching The Attorneys, and we want to remind you that we've got attorneys from Hollis Wright. They're standing by right now. They do it throughout the show to answer any call you have. It's a free call. It is a confidential call. And that number you ask, 1-844-LAW-TALK. That's 1-844-LAW-TALK. We're going to take a break. We'll continue this discussion when we come back. Stay with us.
Thank you for watching The Attorneys each Sunday night, where we come to your living room to provide free legal advice in a confidential, off-air setting. Unfortunately, with the number of calls, texts, and emails that come in during the show, we can't always get to everything. But know this, Hollis Wright is open all week long. You call us at 844-LAW-TALK and we're going to answer your question for free. Thank you for watching The Attorneys, and we look forward to seeing you and talking to you soon.
If this place could talk, it wouldn't. It would sing and celebrate all of our stories of addiction recovery, victory, and community. This is Bradford Health Services. It all changes here.
Welcome back. Glad you stayed with us as we discuss underinsured, uninsured motorist coverage. It's a very important topic. Also want to remind you, this is your last opportunity. We do this throughout the show for you to reach an attorney at Hollis Wright at 1-844-LAW-TALK. It is a free, confidential call. So get on the phones right now. They're standing by, waiting to hear from you. Dylan Hobbs is with us, and this is a topic that is so important. And we've talked about it before, but not to this extent.
Yeah, and so I think it's important sometimes for people to understand, if they walk in a conference room with a lawyer, how a lawyer is going to kind of evaluate their case from a liability perspective and an uninsured motorist perspective, and then potential stacking. Just explain in general terms kind of how you handle that process.
Okay, so I ask a lot of questions, and also meeting with a client, it's confidential, so what we discuss during that time, it stays between you and me. I try to obviously find out about as much coverage as possible for the client. And so what's important about that is I have to identify, like what we've been talking about, the uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage that client may have, whether it be through their own policy. They may have more than one vehicle that has that type of coverage. They may live with someone who has underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage. So that's really important. Obviously, we like it when the at-fault driver has liability coverage as well. But what's really important about knowing about all the possible coverage is you need to put the insurance carrier with the underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage on notice of the claim. And you also need to, if you're going to enter into a proposed settlement with the liability carrier, you need to let the underinsured or uninsured motorist carrier know about that, so they have the opportunity to do what's called consenting. So if they consent to that settlement, you're fine. You've preserved your right to make a claim for underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage.
A lot of people don't recognize that if you don't give them an opportunity to consent, because they try and do it on their own without a lawyer, what can happen?
Then you can't make that claim anymore, that coverage. I mean, you might as well not have it. And that's really a shame, because you might need it. And also, you've been paying premiums on that coverage too.
Talk just a second about if you have an uninsured motorist claim and you're not at fault, it's kind of a rainy day coverage to protect you when someone either is uninsured or underinsured. Does it impact, if you make claim on your UM, is it generally understood, does it impact your own premiums down the road if you activate it?
I think the right answer, Josh, we talked about this a little bit earlier, is that it shouldn't. If it is truly not your fault, that claim should not affect your premiums. They shouldn't go up. But as we all know, sometimes, unfortunately, the insurance company does raise premiums.
And so, you know, part of that too is making sure that you ask the right questions of your lawyer to understand, you know, issues. Art, one of the things that's interesting that people don't understand is traditionally in Alabama, we have a 2-year statute of limitation from the time of the accident to file your lawsuit against the at-fault. If you fail to preserve that right to sue the at-fault carrier on time, you could also waive your uninsured motorist coverage, even though uninsured motorist coverage is a 6-year statute of limitation. So there are some unique rules about how the uninsured motorist carrier has some rights to pursue a claim if you're not going to pursue it against the at-fault driver. It's just a great example of go get a lawyer to lead you through this process, because it's a little complicated. And there are statistics out there that if you get a lawyer, you're entitled to 40%, you're going to get 40% more than if you don't have a lawyer. That's not always the case in really low impact cases, but I'm talking about in traditional cases where someone's injured. You want a lawyer to make sure that they can activate everything that's available. You may have coverages you didn't even know you had because you've got a lawyer involved.
You know, that's so important. That's why we tell people to make sure you get in contact with them. And certainly we feel that Hollis Wright is that law firm that you need to get in contact with. Let me ask you this scenario, Dylan, if I could. It's a situation where it's a multi-vehicle accident. Fault is being distributed. Does the underinsured, uninsured motorist coverage come into play there?
It could. It could come into play there. It just depends on how much liability coverage there is for that particular instance.
Yeah, and what Dylan's saying is exactly right. Like, think about this, Art. Let's assume you're in an accident and the at-fault carrier has $500,000 of insurance coverage, which we see at times. And let's say that your total value of your case is only $150,000. You're going to put your uninsured motorist carrier on notice just in case. But you may never get to your uninsured motorist coverage because you have not gotten all the way through the liability coverage of the person that caused the accident. So uninsured motorists may not even be applicable in the case, right? And so, again, you need to have someone explain the process to you. Doesn't mean that you don't put your uninsured motorist carrier on notice too. Dylan, I've got a couple quick questions. One is, let's say your UM calls you, your uninsured motorist carrier calls you immediately after the accident. They want a statement from you. What's your recommendation on that?
Well, I'd say if you don't have a lawyer, beware, because that statement will be used against you. Yeah. So I would recommend, if you're going to give a statement, you want a lawyer involved. I think that, you know, the insurance company has the opportunity, if you file a lawsuit, to depose your client. So I think it just really depends, but at least have a lawyer around if you're going to give a recorded statement.
I think that's right. Do you recommend get as much UM coverage as you possibly can and afford?
I think that's a good question. I mean, it depends on how much protection do you want to have if you're in a wreck with someone who only has, you know, the state required minimum amount of liability coverage, or, you know, what do you want to have in place for yourself in the event that you're in a wreck? I think that's a good question. It's a personal question you should ask yourself.
He's an expert in this area. A great guide to go to if you've got an uninsured motorist case, and it's why we bring guys like Dylan on. Fabulous job, by the way. It's a really important topic. Make sure you get a lawyer involved if you're in an accident.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for watching it. Of course, we hope you enjoyed this show. Go ahead and subscribe and share all our social media platforms, and join us again for the next edition of The Attorneys.
Thanks for watching The Attorneys, sponsored by Hollis Wright.